Welcome to the Curiosity Crisis. This podcast isn't about topics, it's about an approach. We take eclectic, timeless ideas and distill them into clear commute-length episodes. Designed to help you practice the art of curiosity, this show is for curious minds navigating a busy world.
When's the last time you thought about the sewer under your feet, the undersea cable carrying your Netflix stream, or the routing protocol behind your email? Today, we're talking just about that hidden infrastructure that is the backbone of our economy and society, and what happens when it works, when it doesn't, and just the value that it brings. But before we get into that, always our favorite segment. Luke, what's keeping you curious at the moment?
Yeah, well, I have a pretty clear one today. Listeners would have heard a slightly different intro to today's episode. And what's been keeping me curious is kind of figuring out exactly what our niche is as a podcast. So, regular listeners will know that we cover all kinds of things. And we've been thinking really conceptually about this, and Kush and I had a really good catch up about it. And I guess there's a little bit of a look behind the curtain. Yeah, like we've done a lot on this podcast and we're really proud of it. And we wanted to kind of just shift things slightly. And that is that we want to make sure we articulate what we encompass. And I guess you can kind of see that in the intro now. So yeah, anyway, I guess, what's been keeping me curious is just like pondering that a lot and trying to figure out how to articulate something that's quite broad.
Yeah, no, and we've gone back and forth heaps, and we've both been in deep thought about it. But I think the fact that it's not really about the topics, it's more about the approach and, it harnessing really what it means to be curious. So
yeah,
curious
definitely.
to see how it goes.
Yeah, very. So we hope you liked it. It's a little bit different. But what about you, Kush? What's keeping you curious?
Always curious about a lot of things. I might talk about cash and another one. I've been thinking a lot about cash versus cards.
Okay.
But I'm actually really curious at the moment about, I'm not sure if you heard about like sleep pods or like not sleep pods, but like, bed cooling. They're called like the couple that I'm thinking about is like the 8 sleep pod and the chili pad, which are essentially they're active cooling mattress toppers that go on your bed. And the reason I'm thinking about that is because I live in Sydney and it's just getting hot, and sleeping is notoriously hard here when it gets hot because it's pretty muggy as well. And I think that could be a really good way to locally cool the bed that my partner and I sleep on. So then, we can just like manage that. And it's also, it's expensive up front, but it looks a lot cheaper to run than an aircon for the whole room.
Yep.
So yeah, very, very curious on that. Doing a bit of research, talking to a few people that have it. And when I eventually test it out, I'll have to let you know how it goes because we both know a good sleep is a game changer. So
yeah, definitely. Yes. I'm big on sleep. It's a great compliment when you want someone to have constantly the cool side of the pillow and a good night's sleep, Yeah. And so I can respect having a cool mattress as well. I like that.
100%.
Yeah, so today's episode, we're diving into some hidden infrastructure. And I guess when you think about it, when was the last time that you had something happen like a blackout or an internet outage, and it's just been absolute chaos, And they don't happen regularly, but when they do happen, it's so much effort. Another classic one was where our shipping network was kind of all blocked up in a canal and so much money was lost, but also everyone's packages and everything was delayed like worldwide. And that's like a pretty rare occurrence. But when that does happen, it's just absolute chaos. And so kind of today's whole topic is around infrastructure that works. And we just completely forget about it. We forget it exists. And we have some great examples from ancient history and also the modern day. And just like, we just dive into kind of what some of that technology is and what can happen when it fails.
Exactly. And then some takes at the end as to, what that means looking for the future. We always talk about investing a little bit. So we'll tie it back and really try and, again, learn from history and then apply that going forward. But to kick us off, let's go way, way back. And, infrastructure being the backbone of society is a tale, as old as civilization. And the first example is obviously the great city of Rome and the history there. So the Roman aqueducts and cloaca maxima. Basically, these were aqueducts that stretched for hundreds of miles. And it was really, really impressive. I love plumbing, but they used really precise gradients, as little as a few inches per mile, deliver fresh water without pumps. So nowadays, we've got very, very complex plumbing systems that are incredible and really useful, but you've got pumps and it doesn't matter about elevations too much. But this, back in the day, they had to make sure fresh water could move where it needed to be consumed by the population. And then the dirty water needed to be taken out. And Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, was just that, which drained marshes and carried away waste, reducing disease and enabling Rome to sustain 1 million residents at its peak way back when. So that's just incredible, like the power of good plumbing and infrastructure. And basically it had an invisible daily function, but it was vital to Rome's empire, really, the military, the economy and culture.
And it's just amazing as well, the engineering of that. It's so often we think about ancient Egypt's engineering, but the fact that they could do miles and miles and then go down by, an inch or a few centimeters is just crazy. That precision, just phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you really had to work with gravity and you had no real room for error.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have another ancient lesson for us? Any other examples?
Not in as much depth, but a similar one, which just enabled trade and the access between areas of fertile grounds of food, so feeding the population, is the Chinese Grand Canal. It essentially became the spine of China's internal economy, providing food security, troop movement, and just reach of the administration to all the areas, like a central logistics highway. So basically, I guess back in the day, and it's true today as well, but civilizations that invested in this, really basic foundational and unglamorous, sewerage infrastructure gained disproportionate stability and power. And it's just that skeleton of civilizations and empires that allowed them to do so much more than what came before that, which was more spread out, very individualized, and more sort of like little villages all over the place rather than these massive systems.
Yeah, I think one of the standout things from these ancient lessons is actually that it supported the ability for multiple, or like for large cities. Like the cities wouldn't be able to exist without this. And I think it also kind of supported the populations that they did have, not just in terms of cities, but the populations of those empires, right? Like they wouldn't be able to have reached the scale that they did without some of these innovations, like especially the Great Sewer for Rome, right? That's removing diseases from their city. Yes. Like that's actually pivotal in whether they would have the population that they had or not.
And then when you have the population, you've got the workforce, you've got the economy, you've got the innovations, you've got the growth.
Yeah.
So like all of that was sort of underpinned by this planning and infrastructure and build out. So yeah. Today's episode is sponsored by OptiVenture, the ultimate all-in-one supplement system crafted exclusively for hikers and outdoor adventurers. OptiVenture's unique day and night formulas provide everything you need, from essential vitamins and minerals to probiotics and omega-3s, timed perfectly to match your body's rhythm. The day formula boosts energy, immunity, and mental clarity, keeping you strong and focused on the trail, and the night formula supports deep recovery, reduces inflammation, and promotes restful sleep so you wake up ready for the next adventure. Join the tribe and elevate your outdoor experience. Check out optiventure.co to learn more. How about today? Have you got anything, like what are your key examples from today's infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we're looking at kind of modern day examples, a really clear one and simple one is the internet, right? We have all of these undersea cables that go between countries. And a quick stat for everyone, 95% of international data still moves through approximately 500 submarine cables. And they're not thicker than really a garden hose, which is just crazy to think about. And the amount of effort that is to lay those initially, but then the amount of value that we get out of them. Because 500 is not really a lot for the whole world using internet, right? And that's one of those things where if there's a problem with one of those cables, that affects millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people.
Yes.
But you'll never think about that. You just think, oh, like Netflix is down. But really, the bandwidth of that cable needs to move somewhere else if there's an issue. Yeah, so if we look at some of the issues that they can have, they're vulnerable to accidental damage from like fishing trawlers and anchors and earthquakes as well. And so there needs to be repairs that happens to these. So there's specialized ships and it can take weeks and weeks to fix these. And I think it's just such a classic example that the whole world the whole modern world anyway is run on the internet now. And to think that just approximately 500 cables is holding that all together is kind of a crazy thing.
That's so wild, so wild. I mean,
And
sorry, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, because of that, big companies, so Google, Meta, and Amazon are now funding their own private cables to secure bandwidth, which is a bit of it's a risk mitigation, but it's also, there's the upside there for them in terms of having dedicated bandwidth. But it just proves that is a concern, right?
Yeah, and it's just crazy to see like 500 cables, the whole world has connectivity on the internet through that, and these companies are reaching that scale that they're literally building their own. Like 500, I wonder what the internet user per undersea cable is. Like that stat is some ridiculous number. Like
That's
divide
so true.
billions by 500. To be honest, it's crazy. Like I use the internet. Everyone does, but nobody thinks about what underpins it and builds it. And to some people it probably is a little bit complex. Like we talk about the cloud and like the internet. Kind of, you can't like touch it, you can't grab it, but you use it all the time. So even just thinking about this kind of blew my mind. Like it is like undersea cables that are literally allowing it to run, which is so wild.
Yeah, 100%. And do you have another similar example to that?
Yeah, well, so we went under the ocean. Now let's go out into space.
Okay, yep.
The other one was interesting when we were researching it is GPS, so GPS satellites. So essentially, at the moment, I mean, there's more satellites going up all the time, but essentially, it's a free service at the moment provided by the US military, but it's foundational for our like civilian lives. And just to highlight it, I mean, hearing GPS, people probably think maps, but banking relies on GPS signals for that transaction synchronization happening. Obviously, telecom, so calling requires GPS for that cell tower coordination. I've actually got a friend that works in satellites, and he works in geostationary satellites, which requires the satellite to be directly above a single point and spin with the Earth, which is just really complex, but it backs our communication. So all of our calling and texting, aviation, trucking, agriculture, and even emergency response all depend on it because they're all geographically sensitive. And in terms of like it going wrong or like the absolute criticality of it, GPS jamming or spoofing is another term for it. Essentially, attacking GPS systems is already a tool in modern warfare. So if you can remove your opposition's ability to navigate, it's a crazy advantage. So yeah, it just shows like the criticality of all of these things that we don't even think about or see it very often, but it just backs your life.
I think the crazy thing there is the amount of downstream consumers, right? Like it's banks and it's telecom and it's it's agriculture and just all of this stuff that is actually a downstream consumer of GPS. And I think another interesting thing is that I know that like NASA does a lot of work on helping keep GPS reliable and useful for everyone. And people seem to think that NASA funding is all about going to the moon or going to Mars. Most of NASA's budget is work on GPSs and useful things for everyday people. Yeah, I definitely think that we're talking about this as like hidden infrastructure. It's very hidden, I think.
Yes.
And I think the cost of it going can become very visible. But yeah, I think another really good example is modern plumbing and sewer systems. And I guess, we've talked energy a lot on the podcast, and power grids is another one. When we have outages of electricity, everyone suffers, or when there's an issue with plumbing or sewer and you can't use certain things, whether it's, you can't use your water or you're not allowed to, do whatever. I think it really affects, our modern civilization. And I think something that's important to remember there is that a lot of these systems are aging,
Yes.
They used to be high tech, and obviously now they're maybe not as high tech as we think, but they're a bit of a ticking time bomb in terms of the amount of failures and kind of the likelihood of those and needing to kind of patch up those vulnerabilities. So yeah, it's somewhere that needs lots of work, and it's, like we're saying, it's hidden infrastructure.
Well, that's the thing. Like, we talked way back to ancient Rome, and that's where plumbing started. So plumbing came before a lot of everything else, and then electricity was well before the internet. So the other examples you gave, they're a bit more modern and they started more recently. But some of these, go back decades and decades and decades. So, and I guess to highlight that is, for example, in 2021, there was a famous Texas power outage. And I won't go too much into depth, but essentially it was extremely cold and natural gas, so a key form of energy in Texas, was frozen, like frozen solid, and stopped being delivered to generation capacity. And then essentially 4.5 million homes lost power, water systems failed, hospitals really had to lean on their backup, so they were strained, and there was nearly $200 billion in damages. So I mean, we know what it feels like, what it is like to experience a power outage, but just what it meant for the whole economy there is just insane.
Definitely.
Do you have any others?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really interesting one is the Suez Canal blockage.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there was a single container ship that got stuck in this narrow canal, and basically 12% of global trade dropped for 6 days. And there were losses of the estimated between $9 to $10 billion, which is insane for basically one ship gets stuck and it costs that much. Like
every day.
Amount, every single day, yeah. And yeah, it's just a crazy scenario where, it's so many ships go through this canal and we haven't had one stuck in a very, very long time. And then suddenly one does, and there's so many flow-on effects. And so eventually, ships get rerouted around Africa. And so it increases the time for them to get where they need to go by
hugely,
like weeks. And the amount of cost that is, and then, the logistics of actually having to do that. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that in terms of really big shipping vessels, there's not that many in the world. Like, I think we're talking like 12, 15, 20. Like, there's not a massive amount. They're huge. And, the biggest ones, like there's only like a couple dozen. And so for these to be, they have to go through these choke points. And if there's an issue, it just completely like disrupts all of global commerce. And I guess, the takeaway from all of this is just, our world rests on these fragile physical systems, right? They have massive flow-on effects if they have a failure.
Yes.
And so, we really need to, I think it's just, it's very hidden. It's very, it's not front of mind at all. And that's okay. But I think, it's cool to be aware of what there is and what the effects are.
And just appreciate it. Like, I mean, we often take for granted what we have, but so much has gone into putting it there. So just appreciating that infrastructure.
Just jumping in for a quick break. We'd love it if you did us a favor and gave us a 5-star review on your podcast player. We'd really appreciate it. It helps grow the podcast and get to more ears. Thank you.
Now, you wanted to talk about some business side of this as well.
Yes. Well, I mean, we talk a little bit on this podcast about being timeless, or at least spanning many decades and stuff like that. So when we're looking at, business and investing, and we try and draw lessons from history and connect ideas, one thing that's sort of been made apparent, we did like a venture capital episode recently. But for example, like the historical backbones of, where all the value in our society has been, and our economy has been created, essentially comes from the skeleton that was built by infrastructure. For example, railroads making nationwide markets possible, telegraphs enabling communication in real time, oil pipelines securing world energy supply chains, which then obviously everything is built upon. So if you think about each of those and sort of building them and then charging for the service, or just the criticality of them, that you literally can't live without them, the winners are often the builders of, I don't know if it's the picks and shovels, but it's like the cornerstone, foundational infrastructure, but not the flashy front end. I'm going to pick on tech companies, but any companies that are sort of like really buzzy and, come around in a short time and have, there's a lot of hype around them. They're still built off the same bottom. And I know some of them naturally are state-owned or government-owned, which makes sense because maybe there is only space for one oil pipeline developer, because you're not going to have competing ones. But still, like, the value that underpins so much that's, built on top of comes from these foundational assets. So it's just important to think about those. From your perspective, you're big into AI and a bit about what's happening in the tech world. What are some modern equivalents?
Yeah, well, I mean, you talked about kind of picks and shovels, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think the first thought that everyone has to that is probably Nvidia with selling graphics
Yes.
processing units to all of these AI companies. And, it's yet to really be discovered where the value capture is there, whether it's the picks and shovels, whether it's the foundational AI models, or whether it's the applications that sit on top of them. But at the end of the day, Nvidia's made billions and billions of dollars off selling GPUs. And I think there's a few kind of examples with that. I think a really good one is AWS, which is Amazon Web Services.
Mm-hmm.
And they run the cloud infrastructure that runs like half the internet. And that's like every TV show, streaming service, whether it's a Netflix or whether it's some store, is going to be using some form of cloud infrastructure. Yeah. And I definitely think the biggest benefiters of the modern internet probably are those builders, which is Amazon, Google with their Google Cloud, and Microsoft with Azure, and maybe you could throw in Oracle with their cloud service in there as well.
Hey, for the non-tech among us, and I think I know the answer, but what does cloud infrastructure mean? Like, what is the infrastructure behind that?
Yeah, it's the data center. It's basically, it's the big chunk of compute that sits somewhere that connects to everything really quickly and can facilitate all of your websites and all of your streaming. And there's a lot of infrastructure that goes into that being in as many countries as possible to reduce latency so that you can stream things or you can access things fast. It's basically massive data centers and a lot of compute and kind of the ability to divvy that compute up to all these different consumers.
Yeah.
And I think moving on from that as well, I think one of the biggest other examples of that is TSMC, which is a chip manufacturer. So every phone, every laptop, everything has a chip in it. And one of the biggest foundries in the world, or the biggest foundry in the world actually, is TSMC. And they've done so much there. And they, again, it's a picks and shovels example. And if we blitz through a couple of other ones, payment rails would be a great example, like a Visa, MasterCard, and then Swift for the international between countries. And then if you look at logistics, you look at your biggest kind of transportation, and that could be refrigerated transportation, right? For like foods or medicine.
Yeah.
And just the size of these companies and networks has grown so much. And often there's only a couple of them, right? They're large markets with not many participants. And they're always picks and shovels. And it's because they're the boring stuff a lot of the time. Maybe not at the moment in terms of AI, but generally they are.
Yeah, and I think like in some of them, the key points are like they've found a way to tie the whole world globally. Like think Visa, MasterCard. That is, those two logos are seen in every country around the world. They go across, jurisdictions and currencies and economies. That my card can buy something anywhere all over the world through the internet. Like the infrastructure that's gone in behind that is insane. But I guess the key thing then that it makes us think is like, why do these infrastructure heavy companies, we mentioned a bunch, you said TSMC, Nvidia, Visa, MasterCard, why do they often outlast the trendier consumer apps, the more flashy ones?
Yeah, I actually think, first of all, it's a great question. Why do the boring companies outlast the fancy flashy ones? And I think it is because they're boring, right? It's the compounding of small little iterative processes, right? And you have to grind out a victory. It's not we have this flashy thing and then someone else can easily be a competitor with their own flashy thing. And that we see that heaps at the moment in AI. I have this model and now you've just created this model. And a lot of these companies they're solving hard problems and they chip away at the problem all the time. And every year they iterate, they get slightly better. And eventually they become these huge barriers of entry. And so it's not really something that a startup can compete in a lot of the time.
Yeah, and they pretty much have the monopoly. Like they win, they sort of command the market. Like who's going to now build a system that is, maybe there's crypto, but for example, like Visa and MasterCard and the absolute globalness of their systems, like to build another one of those right now and replicate and just compete in the same market is just, to get the capital to do that or the network effects is near impossible.
I 100% agree. And I think that just generally, it's very rare that a technological shift will appear that would shake that.
Yeah. So going forward, then, what are some things that we could look out for? So what do we look out for in the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to tell. It's hard to tell what the future holds. Our predictions are often wrong, but we'll do our best here. And I do think a clear one is clean energy grids, but I think maybe even more than that as well is kind of energy security, where nations can have their own energy that is not reliant on something else,
yes,
and that it is clean, because that creates an abundance economy of energy. And I think the downstream effects of low cost energy is just so pivotal in any economy. And we'll see how that goes. But what we can say is countries with an unreliable energy grid also don't have great economies. That is definitely a correlation.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you have one?
Yeah, well, just building on that one as well. Like, for example, if you can produce that abundance economy of energy with the lowest cost and ideally, cleanest energy, it allows you to do so much. So then you even go down to the level of like, what's the company or what's the opportunity building that from the ground up? Because everything beyond that with electrification and so forth is built upon that. So it's always going to be required. The other one is, again, piggybacking on what we've already talked about in space, but satellite broadband. So, for example, Starlink are building that new sort of internet backbone with thousands of satellites that is incredibly wide ranging. You can use it anywhere, and the speeds are pretty insane. So I don't know heaps about that one, so I'm not going to go in further depth. But essentially, like, the takeaway is, again, bringing it back to, looking back at history and what's taught us, is that these breakthroughs will sit atop these hidden and forgotten physical infrastructure foundations. And, the best way to spot the opportunities is to ask, who's laying that foundation, who's laying the pipe, and really peel back the layers to see what's at the bottom.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Well, I think we're bang on time. So thanks for listening. Find us at curiositycrisis.com and Curiosity Crisis on Instagram. We're on all major streaming services, so you can listen how you like. We have to ask a favor. If you got anything out of this episode and are getting value from the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast player. That helps us be found by more listeners, and it helps grow the podcast. So thank you, and catch you on the next episode.